Hi guys, welcome back to the second video, How MAGA Ran Me Out of the US. Today we're going to talk about ICE and its effects on American communities, as well as some of the myths that every MAGA supporter spouts constantly. When MAGA talks about immigration, it uses language of law and order or come here legally. Follow the rules, we're a nation of laws. Well, that sounds reasonable until you look at what's actually happening, because what MAGA's created around immigration is not a system of law at all. It's a system of fear. ICE has become one of the most visible tools of that fear. Raids in neighborhoods and unmarked vehicles, agents refusing to identify themselves, and people detained without clear explanation. That's not what public safety looks like. That's what intimidation looks like. I want to pause here because I'm about to show a video, and this video was shared by Farrell, and it's disturbing. It shows ICE agents actually running over a guy's legs during an arrest. And I'm not showing this for shock value. I'm showing it because this is the reality behind their slogans. Take a look.
I know what I just watched, but my fucking brain cannot comprehend it. ICE agents literally ran this guy's legs over, like slowly. It really looks intentional. The video is graphic, so I apologize, but it needs to be shared. What are we doing? They were moving so slowly. They didn't call for anybody. The dude was screaming. And they just picked him up, tossed him in the back of the car, and drove away.
That's not enforcement, that is violence. And before anyone says, well, we don't know the whole story, I want to be very clear here. No story justifies that. No paperwork dispute, no immigration status, no bureaucratic technicality. If it was any other country, we'd be screaming that that's authoritarian. MAGA supporters say all the time, if you
didn't do anything wrong, you don't have anything to fear.
And that is not true. People with legal status are being detained. American citizens have been wrongly arrested. Veterans, people who served this country, have been deported.
Madam Secretary, how many United States military veterans have you deported?
Sir, we have not deported U.S. citizens or military veterans.
I don't believe you served in the military. I haven't either, but I think you and I can agree that as Americans, we owe everything to those who have served our country in uniform, particularly those who have served in combat. Do you agree with that?
Sir, I believe that people that are in this United States that are citizens have legal status here.
Madam Secretary, we are joined on Zoom by a gentleman named Se-Jun Park. He is a United States Army combat veteran who was shot twice while serving our country in Panama in 1989. Like many veterans, he struggled with PTSD and substance abuse after his service. He was arrested in the 1990s for some minor drug offenses, nothing serious. He never hurt anyone besides himself, and he's been clean and sober for 14 years. He is a combat veteran, a Purple Heart recipient. He has sacrificed more for this country than most people ever have. Earlier this year, you deported him to Korea, a country he hasn't lived in since he was 7 years old. Will you join me in thanking Mr. Park for his service to our country?
Sir, I'm grateful for every single person that has served our country and follows our laws.
Can you please tell Mr. Park why you deported him?
Every one of them needs to be enforced.
But you understand that many veterans struggle with PTSD, many veterans struggle with substance abuse challenges. This man took 2 bullets for our country. You have broad authority, by the way, as Secretary, to issue humanitarian parole, to do deferred action. Will you commit to at least looking at Mr. Park's case to see if you can help him find a pathway back to this country that he sacrificed so much for?
I will absolutely look at his case.
People are being arrested at their immigration hearings while trying to come here legally. So when MAGA chants come here legally, what they really mean is exist quietly and invisibly, or don't exist at all. Because legality doesn't protect you from suspicion. Skin color does, and your accent does. And this is where the hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore. MAGA claims to stand for freedom, but freedom doesn't survive when law enforcement operates without accountability. MAGA claims to support the police, but what they actually support is unchecked power. as long as it's aimed at the right people. This is not about border security. If it were, we would be talking about modernizing immigration courts, humane processing, work visas, asylum reform. Instead, we get spectacle raids, cameras, and fear, because fear plays so well on cable news. But here's what doesn't get talked about enough. Immigrants are not a drain on this country. They're the backbone of it. That's why we were always called a melting pot. They pick food, they build homes, they clean hospitals, they staff restaurants, they start businesses, they pay taxes, and they contribute. Yet MAGA has convinced millions of Americans that the real threat to their lives is the person working 2 jobs and praying not to be noticed. That's not accidental. That is deflection. Because it's easier to punch down than it is to confront a system that actually exploits people. This climate of fear doesn't just harm immigrants. It poisons entire communities. Parents are afraid to drive their kids to school. Parents are afraid to report crimes. Entire neighborhoods live under constant anxiety. That's not law and order. That's collective punishment. And when I watched this escalate, when I watched cruelty become policy and violence become acceptable, it was just impossible for me to reconcile the America that I was taught to believe in and the place that I was living in was the same. This wasn't about disagreement anymore. It's about values. And a value system doesn't stop at immigration. It expanded into culture and art, into who's allowed to tell stories and which stories are allowed to exist. Before I get into that, do me a favor and hit the like and then subscribe. The more followers I get, the more I'm going to be able to continue the channel, and it means the world to me that you even take the time to follow along, even if you don't agree with me. Authoritarian movements don't just try to control elections, they try to control the culture, because culture shapes how people feel, and feelings shape what people are willing to tolerate. That's why MAGA didn't stop with schools. It moved next into the arts. We're watching political influence creep into places that were once deliberately protected from ideology. Institutions like the Kennedy Center, Paramount, different universities, arts councils, curriculum committees. These spaces existed for a reason. They're meant to challenge power, not to serve it. Art asks uncomfortable questions. It interrogates history and reflects injustice. It gives a voice to the people who don't otherwise have one. That makes it dangerous to movements that rely on simple narratives and unquestioned authority. So what happens? Funding becomes political, boards are stacked, and curriculums are rewritten. Entire disciplines, humanities, theater, literature, film, are dismantled as useless or elite, unless they align with the approved worldview. This is not about efficiency, this is about control. And when you start deciding which stories are acceptable, which histories are too uncomfortable, or which voices are too disrupted, then you're no longer supporting art, you're curating propaganda. I want to be very clear here. No one's saying artists should be above criticism, but criticism and censorship aren't the same thing. When politicians threaten funding because of a play or a book or a film challenges their power, that's censorship. When schools are pressured to drop courses because they explore race, gender, or history honestly, that's censorship. Or when art has to prove an ideological loyalty or suffer consequences, that is censorship. And this has real consequences. Students graduate without context, audiences are deprived of perspective, and artists begin to self-censor themselves just to survive. That's how you hollow out a culture without ever banning art outright. You don't burn books, you just make it impossible for them to publish. You don't outlaw creativity, you just punish it until it stops showing up. This is why attacks on universities matter. This is why attacks on art funding matters, or schools. This is why MAGA's obsession with controlling the narrative should terrify anyone who values freedom. Freedom of expression doesn't just protect ideas you like, it protects the ideas that make you uncomfortable. And for me, this wasn't abstract. I'm an artist and I'm a teacher. My entire life has been built around creativity, storytelling, and helping people find confidence in their own expression. Watching curiosity be treated as suspicion and art being treated as threat, it's like watching the ground disappear under my feet. I had to ask myself a hard question. Do I want to keep living in an environment where people are becoming more and more afraid to express themselves? Or do I want to live somewhere that understands why art matters? MAGA doesn't survive because it tells the truth. It survives because it tells the same lies over and over again, very loudly, very confidently, and without any consequences. So I want to slow things down here and walk through some of the biggest myths that MAGA relies on. Not insults or slogans, just a reality. Myth number 1, the economy is always better under a Republican. This is one of the most repeated talking points in conservative media. Republicans are good for the economy and Democrats wreck it. The data just doesn't support that. Over the last several decades, Democratic administrations have consistently overseen stronger job growth, better GDP, more reasonable deficit reduction. Republican administrations, on the other hand, have a pattern. Tax cuts for the wealthy, ballooning deficits, economic crashes that someone else has to come in and clean up. Clinton left a surplus chaos, Bush left a recession. Obama inherited a collapse and then stabilized it, but Trump came in just in time to leave behind nothing but chaos. This isn't ideology, it's math, look it up. But MAGA doesn't care about outcomes, it only cares about branding. Myth number 2. Red states pay for themselves and blue states are the takers. This one is especially insulting because it's not just wrong, it's backwards. Blue states consistently pay more into the federal government than they receive. Red states, especially deeply conservative ones, rely heavily on federal assistance, infrastructure, healthcare, disaster relief, educational funding. So what MAGA politicians scream about, they're often doing, and they're doing it while cashing checks from the blue states. They don't oppose spending, they just oppose spending it on other people. Myth 3, liberals want to control everyone. So this one requires me to keep a straight face. So you expect me to believe that the party advocating for bodily autonomy, voting access, marriage equality, freedom of expression, privacy is accused of control, but the party that's banning books, criminalizing abortion, restricting how people vote, telling teachers what they're allowed to say and artists what they're allowed to create is the party of freedom? Give me a break. Control isn't letting people live their lives. Control is when you're trying to decide who gets to live their life. When the government dictates medical decisions and when it prioritizes identity or restricts information, that's not freedom. That is authoritarianism. Myth number 4. Democrats hate America. This lie is repeated so often that people stop questioning it. So let me say this plainly. Loving your country doesn't mean pretending that it's perfect. It means believing it can be better. Democrats are fighting to protect democratic norms. They're defending voting rights. They're pushing for fair representation. They're trying to ensure that opportunity isn't reserved for a narrow slice of the population. That's not hatred. That's responsibility. What actually threatens a country is refusing to acknowledge its flaws and punishing anyone who points them out. This is how people are convinced to vote against their own interests, and this is how empathy gets replaced with suspicion. This is where MAGA's most effective tactic comes into play, because once people are confused, angry, and afraid, they're easier to manipulate. Which brings us to the never-ending grift, the non-stop fundraising, the shoes, the coins, the Bitcoin, etc., etc., etc. The perpetual emergency, the constant message that democracy is going to collapse unless you send money today. At some point, you have to ask an uncomfortable question. If MAGA is so strong and it has so much support, if it claims to represent real Americans, why does it always sound like it's about to collapse? And that's because MAGA never stops campaigning. Not after elections, not after they win. Supporters are in a constant state of emergency. They receive messages like democracy is about to die if you don't act now. I want to show you something. The next video is by Happy Mom and Grandma 1, and she does something incredibly simple. She just reads a fundraising email out loud. Take a look.
Very sad and defeated, Trump says the end is near. He says, I'm sitting here alone in the war room fighting for you. The rest of the staff went home hours ago. It's just me, one dying laptop, and a countdown clock to my imaginary made-up mid-month deadline. We are going to have to act fast. If we don't crush my urgent mid-month deadline tonight, the radical left flips the House and Senate in 26 and finishes what they started. Open borders forever, your guns confiscated, and your kids brainwashed. This is the existential threat that cults use to manipulate their followers. But worst of all, your favorite president, who was actually Obama, might go through another fake impeachment. They're already spending billions, and he says, dirty money, I bet. To bury us and bury you, I need a small sacrifice from every red-blooded American who wants to save the country. And you'll get an ornament. If you rush $47 right now, in the next 30 minutes, I'll personally send you my limited edition red MAGA hat Christmas ornament. This is so scammy, but that's nothing compared to losing the country. This is it. No second chances. We have been fighting for years, and I fear the end is near. The woke mind virus is infiltrating more and more Americans every day. This could be our last chance. This 30 minutes right now. Hold the line, people. Hold the line. And then there actually is a countdown clock, and you can choose to spend $45 or $47 to hold the line and save the country and prevent your kids from being brainwashed. And you get an ornament.
Fear, urgency, threat. You're told that unless you donate right now, democracy will collapse. Not support your candidate, not help fund policy work, but you are personally responsible for preventing catastrophe. That's not civic engagement, that's emotional blackmail. This is how cult dynamics work. You isolate people from the outside, from all their information, convince them that only you can keep them safe, and then you demand sacrifice, which is money, time, or loyalty. And notice something else. The crisis is never resolved. There's always another deadline, another final warning, another enemy. Because if fear is ever stopped, people might ask, where did all my money go? Trump didn't just build a political movement, he built a brand, and fear is that product. Supporters are told they're patriots for donating, and their money is an offering, a proof of loyalty, proof of belief. But the wealth only flows in one direction. Here's the part that's the hardest to watch. Many of these people sending money can't even afford it. They're retirees, working class families. They're already struggling. They're told they're saving America while the people at the top are getting richer. That's not leadership, that's exploitation. And because the threat is framed as existential, questioning becomes betrayal. If you ask where the money is going, you don't care about freedom. If you express doubt, you're on the other side. This is why MAGA reacts so violently to dissent, because dissent disrupts the revenue stream. A movement built on fear can't survive questions. This perpetual state of crisis doesn't just drain bank accounts, it drains relationships. Because when people are told everything outside the movement is a threat, then a disagreement equals danger. That compromise equals surrender, and it becomes impossible to coexist. Politics stops being something you talk about and becomes something that you are. And that's where this finally stopped being theoretical for me. Because this movement didn't just change politics, it changed people. It changed how they spoke, how they listened, and how they treat anyone who doesn't fall in line. I want to talk about the cost of that. The personal cost, the families fractured and the friendships lost. Why, for my own sanity and safety, distance became necessary. That's the part of the episode I didn't want to make. Not because it's not important, but because it hurts. When people talk about political divisions in America, they often talk about it in abstract terms, like red versus blue or left versus right. But what I'm going to talk about is what it does to families and friendships, what it does to trust. Because MAGA doesn't just change how people vote, it changes how people relate to each other. Political disagreements used to mean arguing about taxes or foreign policy. Now it means arguing about whether certain people deserve rights. I have a big problem with that. It means arguing about whether cruelty is justified. And that shift is not something you can just agree to disagree about. At some point, it stops being political and it starts becoming moral. I didn't start distancing myself from people because they had different opinions. I started distancing myself because those opinions came with consequences for other people. When someone supports a movement that strips bodily autonomy from women, or excuses violence against immigrants, or dismisses attacks on LGBTQ people as culture wars, they're not just expressing a viewpoint to me, they're endorsing it. And here's the hardest truth to say out loud. Loving someone doesn't require you to tolerate that behavior. You don't have to tolerate beliefs that actually hurt other people. There's this idea, especially in America, that family loyalty should override everything, that keeping the peace is more important than telling the truth. But peace that's built on silence isn't peace at all, it's avoidance. And over time, avoidance becomes a form of permission. I found myself constantly weighing my words or editing my reactions, not because I didn't care, but because caring had become exhausting. Every conversation felt like a walk through a minefield. Every gathering came with tension. What finally broke me wasn't a single argument. It was the normalization. The way cruelty was just joked about. People were spouting misinformation with such confidence. Completely uneducated people who don't take the time to look up a fact, but indeed sprout bullshit as if it's some kind of gospel. At some point, I had to ask myself a question that a lot of people are quietly asking. What does staying here cost me? Not financially, but emotionally and psychologically. What does it cost to constantly share space with people who believe others are less deserving of dignity? Distance for me isn't about punishment or superiority, and it certainly wasn't about hate. It's about self-preservation. You can't stay healthy in an environment that constantly tells you your values are naive, that your empathy is weakness and your concern for others is threatening. And I know this part will resonate with some people because I'm not alone in this. Millions of Americans have quietly pulled back. We've all muted group chats or shortened family visits or just skipped holidays altogether. Not because we stopped loving our families, but because it's hard to survive that constant conflict anymore. MAGA didn't just fracture political parties, it fractured intimacy. It turned relationships into battlegrounds. And when a movement demands loyalty at the expense of empathy, it doesn't just isolate people from society, it isolates them from each other. Making space wasn't easy. It still isn't. But clarity rarely is. That clarity about who I am and what I believe and what I'm willing to tolerate is ultimately what led me to my decision. And that was to leave the US. Not out of anger, but out of honesty. This place just no longer represents who I am. So after all of that, this is where I land. I'm not leaving because I hate America, and I'm not leaving because I gave up or because I stopped caring. I'm leaving because the version of America that shaped me, the one that taught me empathy and curiosity and creativity and the value of questioning power and authority. That no longer has room for me here. I grew up believing that freedom meant freedom to think, the freedom to ask hard questions, and the freedom to exist without fear. But when cruelty becomes normalized and truth becomes negotiable, staying here stops feeling like an option. Leaving isn't an act of rejection, it's an act of alignment with my values and the kind of place that I want to live in. And here's something important. Leaving doesn't mean I stop caring about what happens in America. You don't stop loving something just because you need space from it. I still believe America could be better, but the potential only matters if it's nurtured. Democracy is not self-sustaining. It requires participation and honesty. And it requires the courage to confront movements that undermine it, even when those movements wrap themselves in big flags. MAGA wants people to believe that criticism is betrayal and that leaving would be cowardice. They want you to think that silence is loyalty, but don't accept that. Loyalty to a country should never come at the expense of loyalty to your conscience. If you're listening to this and you feel conflicted, or you feel exhausted, or you feel like you're constantly swimming against a current, let me know below. How do you stay sane? How have you dealt with the changes in America over the last decade and your relationships with your friends and family? What kind of changes have you noticed? I want you to remember that you are not weak for what you feel. You're just paying attention. And whether you stay and fight or leave and breathe, your choice is valid. And this episode isn't meant to be a final word. It's meant to start an honest conversation. And if you haven't done it yet, please hit follow below and join in on the conversation. I'm honored to have you a part of the journey. So if nothing else, let's this episode be a reminder. Democracy doesn't die all at once. It erodes quietly. And protecting it starts with telling the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. And remember this too. Don't let anybody convince you that your empathy is something to be ashamed of. It's what makes you human. Until next time, keep showing up, keep moving, and keep sipping from the good stuff. I'm Darren Lee Cobb, and this is Cup of Tea.